afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to what I will say is the most important panel of the week, because it's the most important topic in the country. Yes, yes. I'm very grateful for your presence here today. We've got an awesome lineup, so I will go right into it. My name is Celine Rodriguez. I'm TPPF's campaign director for our Secure and Sovereign Nation Initiative. A few of us have been with us for a few years, and you know we've had a lot of names. It's now Secure and Sovereign Nation. You're talking to the same team, and we're happy to have you back this year. So let's get into our panelists. Right next to me, I've got State Representative Mitch Little. Yep. Mitch is a constitutional conservative and lifelong Republican who believes that our elections and border must be secure, property taxes should be lower, and the radical left's agenda has no place in our schools and our communities. He is a successful business attorney with Sheaf and Stone LLP, a native Texan. He attended Harvard University. No whoops. Thank you.
We don't whoop.
Yeah. Where he graduated with honors in government and played football for the Crimson for 4 years. In 2003, he earned his law degree from UT, and him and his wife live in Louisville with their 3 children. We also have Chad Wolf with us. Chad serves as the chair of the America First Policy Institute's Homeland Security and Immigration. Prior to joining AFPI, he served as the acting secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. During his time at DHS, he navigated numerous global domestic challenges like COVID-19, civil unrest, numerous border and immigration crises, natural disasters, and threats to global aviation security. He has received the U.S. Secretary of Transportation 9/11 Medal, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Distinguished Service Medal, and the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal. We also have my friend and colleague here at TPPF, Ammon Blair, who is our Senior Fellow for Border Security. Ammon is a consultant for Omni Intelligence and a consultant for the Operation Lone Star Task Force here in Texas. He also served in the U.S. Border Patrol for over 10 years and in the United States Army for over 22 years. So please give our panel a big round of applause. All right, so let's get right into it. Obviously, like we said, this is the biggest issue in our country. It's what really determined the 2024 election, and there is so much that we could get into on this topic, so fitting it into this next hour will be a challenge, but we will do our very best. So Chad, I wanna kick it over to you. Let's kind of set the stage. So we're talking about borders and backyards, what we've been trying to help people understand across America, and which now they do because of Biden's border crisis, is immigration is not a border town, it's not a border state issue. Every state in America can now see what happens when we don't have secure borders. So the first thing we had to do is start with securing the border. And Trump came in immediately and he signed a bunch of executive orders. We're seeing some of those caught up in the legal process. We're seeing some of those operationally happening at the border. So what is the status with like the 20-something executive orders he signed? What are we still trying to codify? How is the border itself looking right now?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. It's good to be back in Texas. I grew up in Texas. Spend way too much time in D.C. these days, so it's always good to get back to God's country. Here's what I would say. I would say that President Trump and his team over the last year and a half, not year and a half, but 13, 14 months has done a great job in securing the border. A lot of executive orders went out the door in the first day. There's still more that they can do, and there's a lot more that Congress can do to codify that, right? Because the last thing that we want is another Joe Biden coming into office and undoing a lot of what President Trump and his team have done to secure that border, right? It's funny, we're not talking about the border any longer. For 4 years, we talked about the thousands of folks coming across the border, the pictures in Del Rio and everything else. We're not talking about that any longer because I think what it shows you is that the president matters. Having the political will to do what's right, maybe not what's popular, but what's right, is really, really important. And so now we're talking about deportations, removals, repatriations. How do we get people that shouldn't be in the United States out of the country as quickly and as efficiently as possible? So the debate really has moved away from the border in some respects. That's not to say that we should ignore it, because we shouldn't, but it's moved away. I think the other couple of things I would mention are the cartels And I think the president's been very clear-eyed about the threats of the cartels. And it's one reason why we say every state is a border state, because what comes across, the river in Texas, what comes across in Arizona and California does not stay in those, because the cartels are multinational organizations. And they push their product, the trafficking, whatever it is that they are smuggling, into all portions of the country, not just the three states along the border. So that's why we say every state is a border state. But again, under President Trump, and I'm not here just to tout what the Trump team has done, although it's been great, trafficking is down, fentanyl is down. Obviously, the illegal apprehension numbers, they're all down. It's all trending in the right direction. But now is not the time to take your foot off the gas, right? Now is the time to double down, continue to make inroads there, because, A, it's what's needed. And then I would say the Republicans in Congress have got a job to do, and that is to codify a lot of this. Unfortunately, and you all know this, they've got a problem in the Senate. They can't get 60 votes for most anything having to do with immigration. And then I'll maybe end on this, because we've got others that need to talk. DHS is still unfunded, right? We're going into the 6th week, I believe, of DHS being unfunded. So CBP and ICE, while they have some money from the One Big Beautiful Bill passed last year, a lot of their support functions are not being funded right now. So we need fully funded DHS, CBP, ICE, our other immigration components, to make sure that the American people stay safe as it relates to immigration and border security. But there's other elements of DHS that need funding as well, particularly with the conflict overseas. So still a lot to do, but we always, I'll end here, although I've said that, we always tend to look at the glass half empty. I think it's important in this context to look at it as half full. President Trump, particularly during term 1, but now term 2, has done more for border security than any other president in my lifetime. And we're just a little over a year into his second term. So a lot more that can be done. A lot of good work being done by TPPF, AFPI, and others on that front. So a lot more to do.
Absolutely, and you made a great point. Now is not the time to take our foot off the gas, which brings us home to Texas. Representative Little, Texas did so much under the Biden years during our legislative session. We had to think creatively, we had to find policies and really take on that full state authority that the Constitution grants us. So you're a lawyer. What can you tell us? What is the constitutional differences, or what all can a state do to fully enact not just security at the border, but within the state entirely?
So that's a great question. It's one that Texas has been wrestling with. You know, when we say the word border, we as Texans tend to think about bodies and barriers, like how many people are we getting to the border to protect the border? What objects are we placing as obstacles at the border to prevent people from coming over? Because it's the federal government's job to secure those issues, we found ourselves, when I was running for office in 2024, in a state of crisis where the federal government had yielded all of those components to illegal immigration, and then Texas starts surging resources to the border. You're talking about taking over the park in Eagle Pass, surging DPS, and if you went to Eagle Pass during that period of time, what you observed was none of it really mattered, because Texas could not create a policy that was strong enough to rebut an open borders presidency. And so now that we have President Trump in office, illegal border crossings have gone down to almost zero, and now we have the ability as a state to really focus on what I'll call the environmental legislation of Texas, to where Texas becomes a denied environment for people who want to live here illegally. One good example that we're wrestling with, my colleague in the House, Andy Hopper, filed a bill to challenge Plyler versus Doe and the education of illegal immigrants in our schools in the state of Texas. Just raise your hand here in the room if you've ever read the Supreme Court's opinion in Plyler versus Doe from 1982. So it's a handful, some of whom you've read it because I sent it to you, okay? So I was 3 years old in 1982. The Supreme Court justice who wrote the opinion in Plyler versus Doe, Justice Brennan, he was the progressive justice on the court. It was a 5-4 opinion. I just want to read you some of the excerpts from that opinion, and I want you to decide in your own heart whether you find this to be true today. So this is what Justice Brennan had to say about our public school system And you just tell me if this resonates with you. We have recognized the public schools as a most vital civic institution for the preservation of a democratic system of government, and the primary vehicle for transmitting the values on which our society rests. Does anyone feel comfortable in the year of our Lord 2026 considering our public school system as the primary vehicle to deliver our values as a society to our children? Okay, maybe that's a time capsule for 1982. Remember, this is a 5-4 opinion with a very different composition on the court. Now you move on. He says in this opinion, and you're going to be blown away by some of this. I'll read another excerpt for you. Essentially, there's no evidence in the record suggesting that illegal entrants impose any significant burden on the state's economy. Did y'all hear that? This is a Supreme Court justice on the highest court in the land. There is no evidence in the record suggesting that illegal entrants impose any significant burden on the state's economy. To the contrary, the available evidence suggests that illegal aliens underutilize public services while contributing their labor to the local economy and tax money to the state fisc. So, in the year of our Lord 2026, obviously we've got a few more illegal aliens than we did in 1982. I think most of us would agree. So how does the state confront this question? Normally, when you come into the legislature as a freshman and you start to ask these questions, somebody goes, oh wait, Plyler versus Doe. We have to do that. We have to educate illegal immigrants in our state. But what Plyler versus Doe doesn't prohibit us from doing is requiring our public school system to track and identify and calculate the impact of illegal immigrants on our public school system, which is, as you know, substantial. You guys are probably aware that Fort Worth ISD was taken over recently. 1/3 of the students reading on grade level, a majority of them speaking Spanish only. So this is a substantial impact on our way of life in Texas. And so it is really, it's not Chad's job, it's the legislature's job in the state of Texas to create an environment that is unfavorable to illegal immigration. Great example, my colleague in the House, A.J. Louderback, did I cut that off? Can you still hear me? Okay. My colleague in the House, A.J. Louderback, worked with us and has been working for a long time to advance the 287G program to enlist Texas law enforcement officials in the efforts to reduce illegal immigration in our state. That's vital. In Denton County, where I'm from, roughly at any given time, 1/3 of the occupants of our Denton County jail are illegal immigrants that are on an ICE hold. That's a substantial figure. And so it is incumbent upon us as state legislators in Texas to come up with the ideas to address these problems. Foreign commercial driver's licenses, exploring whether we need to tax remittances into foreign countries. There are a number of issues that we as a state need to explore so that if, God forbid, there's ever another Biden-esque administration that comes in and totally abdicates the responsibility of maintaining the border, that people look at Texas and they go, this is not a favorable place for us to live and stay and suck off of the public system.
Great answer, sir. Thank you. And you mentioned something very important here. Yep, please. You talked about 287G agreements, so I want to go into that cooperation on enforcement efforts in our communities. I live in a giant county here in Central Texas, and I was shocked that social media blew up when we had some ICE vehicles parked around town recently, and our police department made a social media post saying, hey, this unmarked car, we know it's an ICE vehicle. We have nothing to do with them being here. They're conducting their own operations. We only know that they're here. Please leave us alone. What the heck? So, Ammon, I'm going to kick this one over to you. What does effective cooperation look like between the federal, the state, and the local level? And specifically, what is that looking like here in Texas?
Yeah, great question. So, who here has ever read the Constitution of the United States? Yeah. Who here has ever read the Constitution of Texas? Okay, so when you're a law enforcement officer, you swear an oath to both, or a public official here in Texas, correct? All right, so now because of that, we know that constitutionally, the federal government can preclude or can not admit foreign nationals into the United States or to the state itself. Now, the state, to include the local law enforcement, they have that same authority to conduct immigration enforcement, concurrent authority, though subordinate to the federal government. But one thing they have above the federal government, and that is the duty of and responsibility of local politics, just like disaster response, just like emergency management. So though their powers and authorities may be concurrent, but subordinate to the federal government, the duty is not subordinate to the federal government. Their duty, in fact, is first and foremost as the first responder within that jurisdiction or county. So when you see your local law enforcement, who here knows who their precinct constable is? Okay. Who here knows who their county sheriff is? Who here knows who their police chief? Okay. Now, who here knows if your precinct constable has signed an agreement with ICE? I'll tell you, there's only 15 constables in the state of Texas that have signed an agreement. How many police departments do we have in the state of Texas? A little over 800. How many have signed an agreement with ICE? 54. Okay? So when we talk and when we point fingers at Minneapolis, that was all over the news, right? When we point fingers, when we have red state governors calling out their own sanctuary cities within their states, we need to step back as citizens, go onto the ICE website and see, like, you know what, though? How about let's look at what every single person or every single law enforcement who has signed an oath to protect the Constitution, meaning my rights and my responsibilities as a citizen, let's see if they're actually doing what they have sworn an oath to do. And I'll guarantee you, the majority of here, your law enforcement is not. So therefore, we all talk and we all attack blue cities as sanctuaries. These sanctuaries by a policy, okay? But guess what? You are probably living in a city or municipality that is a sanctuary by omission. And so because of that, guess what? Chad Wolf talked about the Mexican cartels. The cartels have built that pipeline, that corridor into every one of your communities ever since the early 90s. Guess who has access to that? Every single one of our state and non-state threats. So what are they going to send? They're going to send their own citizens. They're going to send their own terrorists. They're going to send their own men and women to infiltrate your area, especially the areas where your officers voted for Trump. Who here voted for Trump? Who here is a red county? Who here is a red city? You look on there, look at the red landscape across the entire state of Texas. You voted for it. Now you guys need to ante up. And so that's really where we're at in terms of Texas law enforcement. When we say, what are we doing in terms of immigration enforcement? I tell every single person to go onto ICE's website. They have the Excel spreadsheet that is updated every single day to see not only who has signed up to work with ICE, but it actually has their actual agreement attached to that. So unfortunately, for the state of Texas itself, and for many red states, we are a sanctuary of omission.
And a lot of the feedback we get when we talk about that is, that people are worried, well, that's a federal responsibility. I don't want my police officers or my county sheriffs doing that. But that's your community. Nobody knows your community better than the people that police it and work with your community members every day. And you should want them to have the tools and the resources to protect you to the best of their ability. So Chad, I'm gonna come back to you. From your time leading the Department of Homeland Security, it's a huge agency that has taken on so many different tasks over the last couple of decades. There's some shakeup going on in there right now. So the mission of this mass deportations has kind of looked a little bit different over the past year. Where do you believe the biggest enforcement gaps exist today? Is it policy, resources, political will?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Let me just go back to the question before. I think one thing that I grow frustrated at and say I'm pissed off about is this idea that ICE is somehow different than other federal law enforcement. That you have, I think in your story, you have local law enforcement saying, well, we're not ICE. You know, that's them and we're over here. It's just, I think that's what causes things like Minneapolis. That causes these situations where we say, well, they're kind of over here and they do their own thing, but they're not real law enforcement, which is just incorrect. And they enforce immigration law, but they arrest, they have arrest authority, just like any other law enforcement officer. So the left has been very good at developing a narrative that says, well, ICE is not really law enforcement. So you really don't have to pay attention to them. So you can go out and protest them. You can go out doing stupid things. And you know they can't really do anything to you, which is all absurd on its face. And then when something does happen, because a lot of people are acting foolish, then you know we have government shutdowns and we have all this stuff that's going on. So it's really, really frustrating out there. And I wish that conservatives and Republicans in D.C. and others would be a bit more forceful on that front. That bad things happen when places like Minneapolis do not cooperate with ICE, whether they have a 287G agreement or not. So first and foremost. To your question, I think if I look at where the department is now and what can be done more, if I look at political will, I look at resources, and I look at policy, all three are critically important. You've got to have all three working in concert to make effective change. And I think you only have to look at what President Trump has done during the first year, right? Political will and policy ruled extreme. We had President Biden saying, I can't do anything more for the border without Congress passing all these wacky bills. I've done everything I can as a president. President Trump came in, changed the border without any new legislation. He made new policy, but not new legislation. So political will and policy really, really matter. You follow that up with the resources that they got in the reconciliation bill, now you've got all three trifectas, right? Now they can really start moving out. As I said, if you want to make a lasting change, though, you need to codify it into law. Because we know if the left comes back into power, they're going to change a lot of it back to programs and policies that they want to see. So I think you need all three. You need political will, you need the right policy, and you certainly need the resources to back all that up. But I would say that political will is what is lacking by and far, because the left has been at this, particularly when it comes to immigration, for decades. And they have convinced the American people, or I should say, if you back up, they convinced the American people that you got to let in anyone and everyone who wants to come in. Everyone's just trying to, get a job, flee, political persecution. Everyone's coming here for the right reasons. And as Eamon knows, when you work on that border, that's not what you see. You may see a little bit of that, but you see some really bad things down there. And you see some people that are coming into this country that want to kill Americans every day. And those threats, I think, is what drives President Trump and his team. Not just the illegal, which is, I know, the focus of this, but one thing we don't talk enough about is the legal immigration system that is also at risk, that also allows individuals to come in on a crazy number of visas that are not properly vetted, that can stay in your communities legally and do some crazy stuff. So it's not just the illegal immigration, although it's important. We also need to look at the legal immigration side.
No, and that's a great point. Representative Little, going into that legal immigration, the problems is we can't just view this as, well, I'm all for legal, I'm just not for illegal, because the legal immigration has put a huge strain on Texas institutions, on our healthcare system, on our public school system, rent. I mean, you name it, where we have this huge fiscal impact. What impacts exactly is Texas facing because of the scale of mass immigration that we are dealing with today?
Well, the legal immigration component of it is particularly important in our area of North Texas. So if you're looking at Collin counties, Denton County, what we're finding is a cultural transformation that those areas are undergoing by virtue of legal immigration. So H-1B is designed to be a visa to bring talent in the United States that Americans are incapable of filling, but what we're rapidly learning, these jobs are being offered under H-1B pretenses that have they have no need for expertise, everything from working at a gas station to a maintenance person. And so now we have, I think the federal government under other administrations have helped to transform our way of life in North Texas. And there's friction that's going on as a result of not only religious practice, but cultural practice that is impacting our way of life there too. And so now our public schools are inundated by the children of a lot of those people who are here either legally or illegally. And we have a tendency in our mind to create this dichotomy where immigration's a problem over here and property taxes are a problem over here, without recognizing that those problems are the same problem in some ways. And what I mean is our public schools are paid based on the number of students they have sitting in the classroom. So is there any incentive to get any students that shouldn't be there out of the classroom? Of course not. And so who bears the burden of these additional students demographically that are plugged into the public school system? Well, you and I do. So now we as a country and we as a state need to wrestle with the idea of how much cultural transformation is Texas willing to permit under the pretense of legal immigration? Obviously, we're experiencing the brunt of that in North Texas. I know Houston is too. In many ways, I think earlier administrations have abdicated the immigration question. They just go, we can't possibly tackle it. I want to read to you one more quote. This is from Justice Powell from the concurrence in Plyler versus Doe. And I want you to think about the psychological impact of a statement like this on future generations of Americans and people who are running the government. He says, the classification in question, that's illegal, an illegal immigrant, severely disadvantages children who are victims of a combination of circumstances. Now pay attention here to this sentence. Access from Mexico into this country across our 2,000-mile border is readily available and virtually uncontrollable. Do you believe after Trump administration number 2 that our border is readily uncontrollable? It's not. We just lack the courage to control it. And so at some point, people, to your point, Chad, we as Texans and we as Americans need to have the courage to confront these uncomfortable truths that we are now dealing with in our culture.
Well, I want to go into that public safety note that you were talking about earlier. We found out last week, ICE released information that a Mexican foreign national who received deportation orders in 2012, but they didn't know he didn't leave, he kidnapped and raped a 12-year-old girl and left her tied to a bedpost for days. That is one example of hundreds that we are seeing every week that we are finding. So what is that? How do we combat this public safety threat, Ammon, when we don't know, there's no way of measuring who all is here, where they went, who didn't leave when they were supposed to? How do you really get a grip on locating and removing these illegal aliens?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is a complete understanding of how the illegal alien or the foreign national got here and who they owe their allegiance to. Once we can actually understand that situation, then it kind of breaks down barriers across media platforms. We see a lot of times a lot of policy is driven based off of how viral something goes. All of a sudden, oh, this went viral, now there's an executive order, right? And so because of that, we need to address this. We need to talk about worst of the worst. Now, we hear that rhetoric, worst of the worst. Tom Homan will say it, others will say it on Fox News, Stephen Miller will say it. Now let's talk about who that worst of the worst is. Because when you say that, when you see that little child that I saw all the time on the border, okay? When you see that little child, is that child the worst of the worst? No, but they are inadmissible and they are illegal, right? Now, who is the worst of the worst? It is every single entity and organization that child now owes allegiance to and is in debt bondage to. So, who are they in debt bondage to? Well, who got them there? Well, their home state. Look at how many, the amount of remittances that Mitch Little talked about earlier, about taxing. 25% in Somalia of their GDP, remittances. Over $60 billion in Mexico, remittances. So their nations are going to, this is their greatest export, is their own citizens coming into this country. And if you look at it from an asymmetric warfare point of view, this is economic warfare in the United States at an aggregate, not the individual, but as an aggregate. So that nation. Now, how did they get here? Well, those nations allow foreign terrorist organizations and transnational criminal organizations to control that smuggling pipeline. That child or that illegal alien or that foreign national is now indebted to that organization. Who here thinks that a family unit in the jungles of Guatemala has $8,000 in US dollars per person to get to the United States? Who here in this audience has that in their savings account right now? Okay? So to think about that, now that they're indebted, they're here. Okay, so once they're here, and then we allow them to come in under catch and release under the Biden administration, they're now in their areas. Well, when you have a massive amount of foreign nationals not assimilating, but going into enclaves, how hard is it for our law enforcement to conduct the rule of law in those areas? Sometimes they become no-go zones that we see in London and in Europe. Well, who controls those people? It's the same organizations that brought them there, or it's also organizations that allowed them, like the CCP and their secret police stations. It's Iran and their proxies like the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE. It's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Mexican cartels, Tren de Aragua, you name it. Al-Shabaab. They govern the ungovernable areas. Now, who else does that foreign national have allegiance to? The organizations in the political parties or the entities that protect them from removal. When they go into court systems and they're given bail or bond or released, no ICE detainers. Every single one of those individuals, organizations, or political entities, that individual is now tied to that. So now we have an entire society or entire system within the United States that is circumventing our rule of law in order to protect their human cargo. That foreign national, that illegal alien, that little girl, the reason why I left DHS was because of the human trafficking. So when we talk about the worst, we talk about public safety. Really, when ICE goes out there and conducts immigration enforcement, it is the most humane thing that can be done by a government, is by severing every single one of those debt bondages and ties to every single entity, country, or organization that seeks to exploit that foreign national for their own benefit. So really, that is public safety. But unfortunately, unless we talk about this nationally, unless we show exactly that chain of events, that chain of slavery into the United States and who is benefiting from that, then we're going to continue to have the blue cities fight each other. We're going to continue to have these arguments in court systems. We're going to have these district attorneys. We're going to have these judges releasing illegal aliens, releasing criminals, releasing foreign terrorist organizations, all because of their ideology or identity. And really, it's all because they want to protect that, unfortunately, that financial asset and that operational tool, which is unfortunately a human.
Representative Little.
I just want to add one thing. I think it's important that we not just wholesale adopt rhetoric like worst of the worst. And here's why I encourage us not to do that. Look at the Austin shooter who shot up this Austin nightclub. This was someone who came into the country legally, was an overstay and became illegal. And then was that person the worst of the worst right up until they murdered 3 people on our streets? No. There's no indication that person was the worst of the worst. So what we've done mentally is categorize. We go, oh, people who are convicted or alleged to have committed rapes or murders in other countries, those are the worst of the worst. It's no different than if you were a police officer and your job is to stop speeding and the speed limit's 70 miles an hour, you just go, I'm not stopping anybody under 90 miles an hour. What's the speed limit, really? It's 90 miles an hour. So my encouragement to you is to not adopt language that goes, okay, well, those illegals are fine. They're not the worst of the worst. Because the problem with that is we just totally overlook people who do not have the best interests of Texas or the United States at heart and are still here illegally.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about the worst of the worst and how, I would say that the current administration has gone back and forth on this from a sort of a public affairs standpoint. And how do you talk about the threats in your community, and how do you talk about what Eamon was talking about, which is making sure that you prosecute and you go after everyone. And so the way that I think about it is you hear Tom Homan or the president and others saying, look, we're going to prioritize and we're going to go after the worst of the worst. I'm okay with that because I think you can prioritize and yet still enforce the law across the board. It just means you're going to focus some of your resources on those really, really bad individuals. Now let's talk about who that is, because the left does a great job of defining that for us. They will say that you can only remove violent, criminal, illegal aliens. So that's like 2 people, right? That's basically murderers and rapists, right? And that's it, right? Versus what Tom Homan talks about, who I know will be here a little bit later in the conference, public safety threats and national security threats. So someone that has 6 DUIs continues to go out there and drive is not a violent criminal, not defined under federal law. A human trafficker, the folks that Eamon was talking, is not a violent criminal, even if convicted, is not considered a violent criminal. So this is what the left does, and they do it very, very well. So we've got to take that narrative back and define what it is that we mean by a public safety threat, because I think that is a large universe of individuals. National security threats, everyone can kind of guess what those are. Those are terrorists, those are would-be terrorists, those are cartel members. That's easy enough. But then we need to talk about final orders of removal. And this is a hard one, right? Now we get into the conversation of the individual or the grandmother that's been here 20 years, hasn't done anything, and is working and part of someone's family, maybe a nanny, I don't know. But they have a final order of removal, which is they've gone through the due process system. They've seen an immigration judge. They've seen an immigration board of appeals judge. They've likely seen a circuit judge. And in every case, the judge says, you have no legal right to be here. You need to remove yourself. They choose not to, then ICE has to remove them. There's 1.6 million of those individuals here in the country, and probably rising, right? And so there's a large swath of individuals that you can enforce immigration law, and you can have a mass deportation effort. But I think for DHS, and we've seen this, which I think is why we had a little shakeup at the department, it's all about how you do this. And how you maintain public support to do it is really, really important. So the manner in which you do operations, how you talk about it, how you publicize it, all of that matters. And I'm not sure that DHS has gotten that entirely correct over these last 12 months.
Can I just add real quick? I'm sorry, Celine. To caveat off that, 100%. And I think another thing that's missing from the narrative is that immigration enforcement, at the end of the day, they're protecting American citizenship. Is there a difference between a citizen, a legal resident, and an illegal alien? Should there be? Is there a difference in terms of the duties and responsibilities of a citizen versus a resident and an illegal alien? Or how about the benefits and the privileges of citizenship? So just as Chad talked about, that grandma that has gone through that process and has been found inadmissible and is now removable. By removing the illegal aliens, regardless of any level of criminal offense that they've committed after the fact of the crime of illegal entry, regardless of that fact, we are still protecting the whole idea and concept and definition of citizenship. There is a difference. And so immigration enforcement, when they go out there, that is really what they're also protecting, is the very idea that you are a sovereign. The state is a sovereign, this country is a sovereign. And that as a citizen, you do have different rights and responsibilities, and as well as duties, as well as benefits. And so when immigration enforcement comes out there and you're going to see it, they're going to continue to use children, moms, breaking up families, as propaganda pieces. But no one ever talks about, you know what, actually we are protecting the idea of sovereignty and citizenship. And that's why this is also okay. It's okay. It's okay to remove those that are inadmissible. It is not a human right to gain entry into the U.S. and become a citizen. It's not.
Actually, just a few days ago, our friend in Congress, Pramila Jayapal, said that being undocumented is not a crime, being born is not a crime, seeking asylum is not a crime, building a life in our country is not a crime.
Okay. There's a lot to go there. I get, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. They're not undocumented. They have documents. They just don't have U.S. documents, right? And so in what we've seen, and Border Patrol will tell you, they actually dump their documents before they come across the border. So this idea that they're undocumented is frustrating.
Yeah, I'll add to that. And I want to circle back to Plyler versus Doe for a reason. When you go back and you read the opinion in Plyler versus Doe, Justice Brennan wrote this. And keep in mind, Justice Brennan was in the Roe versus Wade majority. Okay? So this is someone who believes simultaneously that children of illegal immigrants are entitled to invoke the Equal Protection Clause under the United States Constitution and entitled to a public school education, but that preborn children are not. This is a moment in time, so you go back for over 40 years ago, the jurisprudence of our country doesn't accurately reflect what you and I already know in our hearts to be true, that being a citizen means something, and that the entitlement to, or your entitlement to rights under the Constitution have significance in that you are a citizen. And so at some point, the jurisprudence for our country needs to match what we already, you and I, through common sense, know to be true about citizenship, that there is a difference between people who are documented and undocumented, or people who are in the country legally and illegally. You guys, I'm sure you've seen the slogan, no one's illegal on stolen land. You guys familiar with this expression? Use it with your kids. I use it with my kids all the time. They tell me to get out of the room. I go, no one's illegal on stolen land.
But you're an American as soon as you get here.
As soon as you get here. These are things that we know through common sense and our life experience not to be true. Our laws and our jurisprudence need to reflect that reality.
Gosh, there's so much more I want to unpack, so I hope y'all are getting some really great questions ready because it's almost time for Q&A. But before we end this part, what's really important here for our audience is what is the Texas legislature going to do through the interim into the 90th legislative session? So our interim charges were recently released, and there's a big focus now on not just border security, but homeland and border security, which I love to see. So, sir, can you tell us what can we expect to see moving forward with the legislature on these issues?
Sure. So if you look at the interim charges that the Speaker released, most of the items having to do with what I'll call the border or immigration are focused on Homeland Security's docket, I'll call it. And it primarily has to do with foreign or transnational influence and the way that that influence is being exerted in our country. We as a state should have and do have the right to repel an invasion. Fortunately, at the moment, the Trump administration has helped us to triage that invasion. So now we have the right and opportunity to think about those other things. One of the things that is forefront of our mind in North Texas is the ability of foreign actors to come into our country and finance the Islamification of Texas. It's something that we think about quite a bit. So I think the legislature will lean into that topic with great enthusiasm because it's something that is literally on everyone's minds. Another thing that is a central topic that I think all of us can appreciate is ensuring that the people who are driving the most dangerous vehicles through the state of Texas can speak English or are from our country and are not showing up and driving these vehicles without the ability to do so, or without the legal ability to do so. So these are some things that are on the forefront of our mind. Other things that we've been talking about, obviously, are, and that come up again and again, taxing foreign remittances, and trying to quantify the effect of illegal immigration on our schools. I think these are all worthy and noble topics for us to discuss. They're on the minds of Texans, they're on our minds as their representatives, and we need to have the public discussion about them.
And Chad, coming over to you, coming from the DHS background, what is something that you really want to see Texas focus in on to really help the federal effort when it comes to enforcement?
Well, I think they've done so much. I mean, the state for 4 years under President Biden was that bulkhead, right? Was doing more than any other entity, including the federal government. So I think it's now time for the federal government to do more and to help out. But I think making sure you got the right policy and the right laws in place, really, really important. Two other things that I just want to kind of hit on, which we've talked about. One is, I get the question a lot, well, why is having all these folks come into the country, either legally or illegally, a bad thing? And I kind of scoff. I say, well, if you're talking about illegal immigration, I mean, we talk about the criminality, we talk about the cartels, we talk about all the crime in your community. It's all terrible. But what I've heard up here, which is also really, really important, are the economic consequences of that and how it impacts hospital systems and public education systems and things that are very difficult to actually calculate, but are really, really important. The people that live in those communities, they know it best. I was in Yuma, Arizona about a couple years ago, and they said during the height of during the crisis under President Biden that their emergency room was overwhelmed, right? Because an emergency room just takes the most critical, whether they're a citizen or not, they take the most critical. And so their residents were having to drive 100 miles to go to an emergency room because all the critical patients were illegal aliens. And so it's things like this that I think people are starting to wake up and understand. And I was on I debated a libertarian up at Yale University about a month ago and testified with the same individual a couple of weeks later. And his sort of thesis was illegal immigration actually benefits the American people, and it benefits the country, and it's so great. And I asked him one question that he couldn't answer. I said, if it was so great under President Biden, why weren't we in an economic boom? Instead, I heard New York City saying, I need billions of dollars to take care of these people, right? And obviously, the state of Texas had real concerns. So this idea that somehow, mass illegal immigration is going to benefit the American people as a whole, I think is sort of a preposterous kind of.
And I just want to follow on one thing, and you make exactly the right point. But it's not impossible to count them. Watch, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not impossible to count them. We just don't do it. We have not decided as a state. We are counting the effect of that. And if you don't measure something, I'm sorry, you don't care about it. It's true in your business. It's true in your home. If you don't measure something, you don't care about it, really.
And then the second thing I think we need to do a better job of is on the legal immigration side, is really diving into that and understanding who's coming into our country and why. And as a federal government, if you can't control who's coming into your country legally, or illegally for that matter, but legally in this, then I don't know what you're doing, right? You should have the ability to say, yes, this person gets in, this person doesn't, for a variety of different reasons. We need folks that come in that are going to contribute to the economy, that are not going to be a public charge. We need folks coming in that can assimilate, right? Our legal immigration system has not been updated in 30 years. And it is designed for a different country, different economy, and all the like. So we need to do something very dramatically. We talk a lot about illegal immigration, and I know why, because of the crisis that we've had. But we need to understand what is happening, because I think the left is starting to use the legal immigration system just as they have the illegal immigration system going forward.
Right. Before we go into Q&A, I'll just note real quick, we talk about that cost and what is really happening here. I'm from the border, I'm from Del Rio, Texas. And what happens, and I never knew this wasn't normal until I left Del Rio, is the doctors in Texas coach the pregnant women in Mexico. This is what you say at the port of entry. The ambulance will bring you to the hospital. I'll induce you. And this happens almost every single day. And they don't pay their hospital bills. They don't pay the ambulance bills. They have an American citizen baby. And oftentimes they'll go live in Mexico while they're getting CHIP, Medicaid, TANF, SNAP, you name it. And this is happening all across the border, not just in Texas, and then that goes into our community. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider, Chad, like what you're saying when it comes to immigration. So I'll move into Q&A now. Where are my mic holders? Okay, right back here.
Hi, Dave Heckert. I have 4 questions. 2 are pretty quick, just need yes or no. Isn't there a caveat in that Supreme Court ruling that allows a state to stop the services if they become an undue burden on the society or the system?
No.
Thank you. Have the rifles, the drones, the flares and the choppers, and the aerostat been given back to the Border Patrol?
Ish. So some of the aerostats have. When you look down there on the border right now, you'll see that they're utilizing certain technologies. They're not going to give up what technologies because of operational security. But like Anduril, RST towers are still using, or IST towers. Okay. Anduril uses artificial intelligence as well as machine learning, and was there present. I was working with the company prior to me leaving. So we are putting out, but also realize we are still using drawbridge camera systems, hunting cameras along the border. We're still utilizing Vietnam-era ground sensors to try to figure out what is coming across. So we still have a long way to go in terms of creating a domain awareness on our southern border.
These next two, I'll just ask you, and then one answer from you, please. What about the jihadist infiltration threat, which I was told was something we need to be concerned about in March? And the other one is, if we do not have law enforcement with signed agreements and they fail to do their job, what is our recourse as a U.S. citizen?
Let me take the first question with the jihadist infiltration threat. I'm going to throw out an idea that I've been kind of rolling around, and I'm hopeful that some of our legislators will help me develop this idea further. But I think that you may recall that we banned China, Iran, Russia, North Korea from owning real estate in our state and gave the Attorney General the ability to divest those parties of the real estate. I think we ought to give the Attorney General the ability to investigate and enjoin real estate development in the state based on potential foreign influence under the same circumstances, so that if we have a fear that a particular real estate development centered around, a mosque, is as a result of foreign money influencing our state, coming in here and affecting our security, the Attorney General ought to be able to file suit and enjoin that type of development.
Good afternoon. My name is Louisa Deason, and I worked for Tom Homan. I'm former ICE. I'm the former Public Affairs Officer for the Houston District Office under INS and ICE. My husband retired after 30 years and got called back after being retired for 4 to go back and work. And he does it with pride. Both of it runs in our blood. I commend all of you for being up here and discussing what nobody wants to talk about. And the fact of the matter is, you're absolutely right, Mr. Chadwolf. My husband loved it when you were with the agency. One of the things that we failed to realize is that the two most abused visas, legal immigration, are the H-1B and the foreign students. And there has to be more scrutiny with that, because the ones abusing those the most are coming from countries that are not friendly to the United States. The second thing that we need to focus on is the asylum regulations. We cannot have them waiting here, loose in the country, while 95% of what arrived during the Biden administration does not meet the requirements. It's for fear of political persecution and religious. It's not for economic. It's not for storms and hurricanes. And what happened under the Biden administration in Del Rio, I was getting calls from the Border Patrol because they were all under a gag order. And as a former public affairs officer, they were asking me and begging me to please correct the rhetoric. I've now started my own podcast called Frontline Facts with Louisa Deason. We correct the immigration every single day. Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, just really quick, thank you for what you do. And I think, President Trump, talk about those two visas, specifically the H-1B and obviously the asylum rules. They're trying to do everything they can with the executive authority, but they need Congress to do more. If you want that to be a lasting change, they've got to do more. And so there's limitations on now. President Trump does a pretty good job in stretching those limitations as far as humanly and lawfully that you can do. But if you want that to be a lasting change, we've got to have Congress do their job.
And then I think also an understanding of asylum. Asylum is a discretionary relief. It is not a right to get asylum. So when someone comes across into the United States, it's a may, not a shall, go through that process. So under current statute, we still have the ability to detain and remove that individual regardless of that fact. So whenever someone comes in and says, no, they're all asylum seekers. No, you cannot remove them from the United States. It's right there in statute.
Okay, my question is for Representative Little regarding H-1B visas. As Mr. Wolf said, Congress has to do something in the national level. What can be done at the state legislative level to wipe them out, preferably, or at least control the overuse and abuse of H-1Bs in Texas?
Fran, that's a great question. I've been racking my brain on the same question. I know Governor Abbott has led on some of this, but I think we need to ensure that no one doing business with the state of Texas is doing so under H-1B employment. I think that's a very important move. But my discouragement in that is it's just a tiny sliver of the total overall effect of H-1B in our state. And so it becomes very difficult to tailor a state legislative solution to what is essentially a federally manifested problem. And I invite your suggestions because I don't have a whole lot of them.
He just said his office is open 24 hours a day.
The question I have is starts with Mr. Ammon's first opening remarks, and it dawned on me. I think that the problem is our own fault. We have allowed the left to dominate the propaganda war. Everybody that's in the liberal left press goes every day telling the world that we're all bad and that this is wrong and that the left deserves the right. Every congressman that gets interviewed always specials that. I never see the right have a propaganda program. And I am suggesting that this group and this organization, which has done a lot of work, we need to start an obvious, concerted propaganda program to where our congressmen, our state representatives, and our media talks about what is right about what our position is, as opposed to, you know, the Fox sit there telling you that the illegal immigration is okay. Well, you explained why it was not okay, but you asked this room. 4 or 5 hands went up. So the question is, we are illiterate to ourselves, and we do not carry that message to the public to help us win this battle.
I think, yeah, well said. I think that's a really good point. What are the things that comprise a nation? Borders, language, culture. Which one of those 3 things is not under attack in the United States of America? Intentional, direct attack. Our culture is being transformed by the amount of legal immigration that's been introduced into our environment here in Texas. Our border was essentially non-existent for 4 years. Language, any guesses on how many languages are required to be spoken in Denton ISD, which is part of the area that I represent? It ain't more than one. It's not less than 2. I can tell you that. It's a lot. And so when we look around at the place where we grew up, and now those 3 things are being transformed, borders, language, and culture, you have to realize that unless you act, you're not going to have much of a nation left. That's what comprises a nation.
I'll say this. I think the right needs to do more on this, particularly on the messaging front. I think we've done better in the last several years, and certainly in 24 when President Trump was elected. I think the left obviously has a machine behind them, so it's easier when you have that machine going. But if you look at sort of non-traditional media outside of the networks, I mean, they are getting the message out. The question is, how do we continue to do that? So it's a good question. It's hard to answer. I mean, I've been out in media now for 6 years out of office, or 5 years, and I do 30 media spots a day. And you could probably have 6 other people doing the same, and you're still not going to get that message out. So it's when you've got folks like the Post and the New York Times and others, right? And what do? They find that 20-year-old grandmother, or 20-year grandmother that's been here, the one child who ICE is, quote, deporting a child. Well, no, they're deporting their father or their mother, right? So the full story is not told. So it's trying to get those facts out. And having the credibility to do that's really, really important.
I think we have to raise the pot of money and have paid advertising, just like they advertise for safety on the streets. They advertise to go to all these good things that the society thinks to
Right here.
A subset of what you're talking about, although you mentioned it, this Chinese issue. My older brother's wife is Chinese, born and raised Shanghai, China. Her dad was dragged out in the Cultural Revolution. They beat him to death, although luckily he survived, but they didn't let him survive intentionally. Her brothers were dragged away into the mountains to be farmers. She knows firsthand what's going on in China. She's not going to open her mouth because she's got a sister, a couple of aunts, and some other relatives in China. And believe me, these Chinese police stations know where she lives. What are we doing about, I mean, we talk about the cartels and we talk about the Muslims. Hey, the Chinese are just as bad, and President Trump, God bless his soul, just okayed 600,000 visas for Chinese students. What are we doing on that topic?
You know, I have a list of bills on my phone, and one of the bills that is on there to have drafted, and I hope my colleagues will join me in this, is dealing with the question of birth tourism and surrogacy in the state of Texas. So the fact that you could have foreign nationals pay someone to have their baby in America, and that baby becomes an American citizen, is abhorrent. That should not be possible in the state of Texas. It's just such a no-brainer for us to ban this practice, to ban birth tourism. It almost defies explanation why we've not done so already.
When I think about the CCP and the threats, I think about it a little bit sort of broader, although that's certainly an important one. But whether you talk about intellectual property theft, the abuse of our student visa system, which is rampant, you talk about medical devices from Chinese companies that are in hospitals today, that information goes back to China. You talk about GLP-1s. A lot of that compounding is coming from China. We don't know if it's good or not because it's not getting tested here by the FDA and others. And so there's a lot of different threats, both outside of the military threats, that I think as both a federal government, state government, we got to get serious about. And there's some economic, obviously, trade-offs there, right? There's a lot of investment here, not only in the state of Texas, but across the country from Chinese companies and others. But as long as there is a law in China that says every company has to report back to their intelligence unit there in China and to the CCP, we have a big problem.
Chad, even our Ozempic is Chinese?
What's that?
You said even our Ozempic is Chinese?
It is.
I'll just caveat off on that. Do our law enforcement, who here is a veteran of foreign wars? Okay, overseas, when you're conducting operations like internal defense of another country, when you're trying to eradicate a terrorist organization, who usually conducts the operations or the intelligence gathering or the case building? It's the local law enforcement, right? It's everyone at the bottom, everyone who knows the community. When I was overseas, who did I talk to? I talked to the tribal leaders because they know the community. They know where the Taliban was. They know where Al-Qaeda was. Here inside the United States, when you want to do internal defense, what you're asking us to do our law enforcement even know how to do it? Do they have the tools or the intelligence technology to gather and to map the entire threat network of their county, take all that information, form it into a situation where it's actionable intelligence, then make that into an actual case and an investigation? No, they don't. And
The people who hire them want them to?
correct. And so the case is this. What we can do in the state of Texas is to make sure that all of our law enforcement, we are now occupied by our enemies. We're occupied. This is like, if I were to go overseas right now, this is like I'm conducting a foreign foreign internal defense. There we go, foreign internal defense mission. But now it's domestic. And so when I'm here, I need those same tools and apparatus that I would have to use over there, but now here domestically. Now there are companies out there that do that, like Palantir, that Joe Lonsdale and his group offer. And there's certain areas, but it's very costly. And so until our law enforcement actually has the tools and capabilities and capacities to include the personnel to do so, as well as the training and everything else like that, there's just a whole gamut of things that we need to provide local law enforcement now that we are dealing with foreign terrorist organizations and our enemies inside of our communities. So yes, there's a way, but it's going to take TPPF, it's going to take all of us collectively to try to figure out those solutions. Sorry.
Thank you all, panel, for taking the questions and the discussion today. And thank you all in the audience here. I'm A.J. Lauterbach, House Representative. Mitch, as a colleague of mine, one of the priority issues that we've had trouble in the Texas legislature for many sessions is E-Verify. To clear up the massive fraud in our state, to clean that up once and for all. Would you stand with me, with other colleagues in this room, and vote for that?
Absolutely. It says right here on my policy ideas.
Thank you.
E-Verify. Yeah, it's, you know what's fascinating though? I don't know if we've got enough people to stand with us to pass that bill. And I think what we ought to do as Republicans in Texas is inquire of our representatives whether they feel it's appropriate now to vote for and pass E-Verify and require that people working in this state are legal and citizens of the United States.
Yeah, I get asked often, what's the one thing the administration can do more of to stop this? And it gets down to incentives, which is where E-Verify comes in, right? You start eliminating all the different incentives, and you talked about creating that policy environment here, or the atmosphere here in Texas, where they don't want to come. What you're really talking about is the incentives that are drawing them in. And so two that I think about often, one is E-Verify, so thank you, Sheriff. But the other one is work permits for illegal aliens, right? So you can come across that border, claim asylum, say the magic word, and in about 5 to 6 months, you get a work permit that allows you to continue to work until your case is heard 4 or 5 years later, right? This idea that we're giving work permits to folks that come here illegally, I think is a huge incentive, right? Because for the vast majority of folks, that's all they want to do. They want to come here, they want to work, and they want to provide that money back to their home country in the form of a remittance. And so if you take away that incentive, I think you start to get to the real issue.
And then to caveat off that, what they said earlier, what Chad said earlier about vetting. Look, as a Border Patrol agent, all the illegal aliens that came into the United States, they ditched their documents like he said. They could come up to me and say, hey, my name is Donald Trump. And I, as a Border Patrol agent, would be like, okay, Donald Trump, welcome to America. Well, guess what? I had to put them into the federal system as Donald Trump, or whatever name they gave me, their birth certificate, their nationality. There was no vetting, what Chad Wolf talked about. So now we have millions of illegal aliens. We have no idea if that is their actual identity. Now they get those work permits with that government-issued identity. So they go and work for the employees here inside of Texas. That employer goes through the E-Verify, does the entire I-9 process, and then guess what? Come to find out, the IRS comes back and said, hey, that's not Donald Trump you just hired, okay? Guess what? You just hired an illegal, and now we're going to go after you financially because you're now promoting illegal. So I'm going to push also with that E-Verify, there must be a vetting apparatus because there are corporations inside of Texas and the U.S. that are trying to do their very best, and they're still getting hit by the IRS and DOJ, when at the end of the day, it was our fault as the federal government for not properly vetting those who came in here illegally and then providing them those work documents that they're now utilizing.
Last question right here.
Hello. My name is Andrea Pinkowski, and I am a Latina, I am an immigrant, and I also practice immigration law, which is very uncommon. And on top of that, I'm a conservative. So imagine I live in San Diego, California. I feel sometimes like I'm holding a wall by myself down there. I've been harassed, I've been criticized, insulted, you name it. But what I believe that we lack here, most of it, is education. Everything that you're saying right now needs to be spread out to the Latino community. Because right now we're demonizing like the law enforcement, and most Latinos believe that ICE is just evil. And I'm on the other side trying to educate my audience. And with all the pushback and everything that I've been going through practicing immigration law, I noticed that there is a community like me, immigrants who are more patriots than Americans. They're more Latinos, but they're also more Americans. And we need to reach those people because they're afraid to speak because of the situation. Because unfortunately, there is freedom of speech, but we cannot exercise it in certain places. So my recommendation today, let's just connect better. Let's connect with that audience. My Instagram account has 67K, And it's not that much compared to the ones that spread the narrative. You know, my colleagues have millions of followers. But I believe that it's an important way to reach the younger community, the Latinos. So open up those doors so that we can, through these channels and through the work that we do, we can educate better. That's my recommendation to you guys.
Well, I'll just maybe end on this. I agree with that, and the question from the gentleman in the back is, how do we do better? I would say sometimes we get in our own way. So every day that we're not talking about the historic successes that the Trump administration has had on this issue is a day that we are falling behind. Every day that we have to talk about Minneapolis, or we have to talk about DHS being shut down, is a day that we don't get to talk about all the people that we're keeping, all the bad people that we're keeping out of the country, or the people that we are re-vetting, or that the Secretary of State is canceling their visa for any number of issues. We don't get to talk about all the good things that are occurring where that glass is half full. We are now talking on the left's how they want to talk about it, and they would love for us to just continue to talk about places like Minneapolis. So when I say that it really, really matters about how you conduct operations and how you talk about it and how you go about your work day in and day out, it really, really matters, because the narrative can be taken over like that, and then all the good work that you've done, people start to forget, right? Because we've heard this. We just need better facts out there. Well, we've had facts out there for 13, 14 months now that a lot of people have forgotten, because over the last month and a half, it's been very negative on ICE. It's been very negative on immigration enforcement. So it's really important on the messaging and how you talk about it and the messengers that you have out there talking about it as well.
And as we close, we have a few minutes. I want to ask for each of you briefly, starting, sir, what is your top priority in this area in the 90th legislature?
Top priority, I think, is to find a way to quantify the impact of illegal immigration on our public school system and to make the public school system account for it. Even if we are not ready to decide the issue of whether a public school education should be provided to a child of an illegal immigrant, remember, if you don't measure something, it doesn't really matter to you. We ought to have the ability as a state to quantify the impact so that we can decide whether we want to keep paying for it and whether Texas has a rational interest in protecting itself and its resources from illegal immigration. You know, as we battle the property tax crisis, I'm going, this is one component of that, and we need to find a way to measure its impact. And my belief is it is significant.
Ammon, what is the top thing you hope to work with the legislature on in the 90th?
That is to codify any ways and means that we can create an organization or apparatus to conduct mass deportations and border security. And what I mean by that is organizationally. So we have SB 36, if you guys remember, that was created for the Texas Division of Homeland Security, but unfortunately it doesn't have enough teeth. And so we don't have the ability to, or we don't have the organization to make sure that everything is run smoothly. The entire identification, apprehension, detention, and removal cycle is completely hit or miss across the entire state. And so until we actually organize this effort, kind of like what Florida did, if we followed the Florida model in terms of their immigration enforcement operational plan, and then if we also codified a true border force, regardless of what president is there, Texas will be able to conduct all these operations, whether that's border security or immigration enforcement and also internal defense moving forward.
And Chad, with your work in DC, what is going to be your top priority to help with the enforcement effort?
Well, I would say the priority will be to maximize success over the next 3 years, right? And so what do I mean by that? Is making sure that the narrative isn't lost on the deportation. We have an issue we haven't talked a lot about is sanctuary cities, and making sure that we combat those in a real and effective way. I think they should be a thing of the past, those jurisdictions, and that gets into working with ICE and the like. And then the last thing, which I've talked about a couple of times now, is really starting to dig in on the legal immigration side. Mm-hmm. I think if we just ignore that, we're going to see the left utilize that system much as they have the illegal immigration system over the last several decades. And in 2 decades from now, we'll be saying, well, I wish we would have identified that. I wish we would have done something about that. I'm telling people, you got to do it now.
And speaking of now, we have alignment coming up in the 90th legislature with the Trump administration and the work that our partners in DC are doing, the work we're doing here in Texas. So this is our chance to seize upon it. Like Ammon said, immigration enforcement is the most humanitarian thing we can do for anybody across this globe trying to come here. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. If we could please give a hand to our incredible panelists.